The small town of El Paso, Texas, was known for its dry winds and dusty streets. In the midst of that barren landscape lived a boy named Ethan Miller, only 10 years old, but already carrying the burdens of a man. His life had never been easy. Ethan's mother had passed away when he was just 5. Her fragile body giving in to an illness no one in the family could afford to treat. His father, broken by grief and unable to face poverty, disappeared one day without saying goodbye. Since then, Ethan had been living with his aunt, a woman consumed by alcohol and her own disappointments in life. Though she allowed him a corner of her crumbling house to sleep in, she offered little else. The boy learned early that survival meant relying only on himself. Every morning before the sun stretched across the Texas horizon, Ethan would wake up, clutch a bundle of lottery tickets, and head to the busy streets. His small hands clutched the slips of paper as if they were treasure, though he knew the truth. Most people brushed past him without a second glance. Lottery tickets, just $1, his voice would call out hoarse from shouting. The people of El Paso had their own worries. Some spared him a sympathetic smile. Others turned away. The lucky days were when someone dropped $1 into his hand and told him to keep the ticket as well. Those moments gave him just enough money to buy a sandwich, or sometimes nothing more than a piece of bread and a bottle of water. But for Ethan, school was a dream, wrapped in glass, visible, but untouchable. The nights were the hardest. After hours of wandering the streets, he would return to his aunt's house. Sometimes she wasn't even there. Sometimes she was, and the smell of cheap liquor filled the room. Ethan would curl up in his corner, on an old mattress, clutching the day's leftover tickets, as if they could shield him from the cold. Still somewhere deep inside him, a flame flickered. It was faint, but stubborn. Perhaps it was the memory of his mother's soft voice, whispering that he was special, that one day he could be someone who helped others. Perhaps it was simply the resilience of a child who refused to give up. One sweltering afternoon, as the sun burned down on the cracked pavement, Ethan trudged along Main Street, his throat dry, his steps heavy. He had sold only 2 tickets since morning. His stomach growled, reminding him he hadn't eaten since the previous night. Just as he was about to give up and sit in the shade, a gentle voice called out, "Hey, son, are you selling those tickets?" Ethan turned to see an elderly man with silver hair and kind eyes standing in front of a small grocery store. His clothes were neat but simple, his posture slightly bent with age. Unlike most people, this man wasn't rushing. He was looking directly at Ethan as if he actually saw him. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied, his voice soft but hopeful. $1 each. The man smiled and reached into his pocket. "I'll take 1. Actually, I'll take 5. Ethan's eyes widened. 5 tickets meant $5 enough for a real meal. He quickly handed them over, his small hands trembling slightly. The man didn't just take the tickets and leave. Instead, he lingered. "What's your name, son?" he asked. "Ethan. Ethan Miller." The man nodded thoughtfully. "Ethan. That's a strong name." He studied the boy for a moment, noticing the dirt on his clothes, the weariness in his face that seemed far too old for a 10-year-old. Something stirred in the man's heart, a feeling he couldn't ignore. That man was Mr. Robert Anderson, a retired schoolteacher who had lived alone since his wife's passing. He had spent his life teaching children to read, to write, to believe in themselves. But since retirement, his days had become quiet, empty. Until that moment, until he met Ethan. For Ethan, it was just another customer, though a kind one. He had no idea that this meeting, so ordinary on the surface, was about to change the entire course of his life. As the man tucked the tickets into his pocket, he said softly, "Stay safe out here, Ethan, and don't stop believing that good things can happen." Ethan nodded politely, though deep down he wondered if good things were meant for boys like him. He didn't know it yet, but fate had just introduced him to the person who would become the most important figure in his life. The following week, Ethan found himself, once again, standing on the same corner, clutching a bundle of lottery tickets in his small hands. The summer sun showed no mercy, beating down on the asphalt, making the air shimmer. He shifted from one foot to another, trying to ignore the hunger gnawing at his stomach. Most passers-by ignored him. Some shook their heads, others waved him away before he could even finish his sentence. But then, a familiar voice broke through the noise of the street. "Ethan, isn't it?" The boy looked up surprised. It was the same silver-haired man he had met a few days earlier, the one who had bought 5 tickets. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied shyly. I remember you." The man smiled warmly. "And I remember you. My name is Robert Anderson. You can call me Mr. Anderson." Ethan nodded, not sure what to say. People rarely remembered his name, much less came back to talk to him. Mr. Anderson glanced at the boy's thin frame, the way his shirt hung loose over his bony shoulders. He felt a pang in his chest. He had spent years teaching children, some from difficult backgrounds. But this child seemed particularly fragile, like a flower, struggling to grow in dry soil. "Have you eaten today, Ethan?" Mr. Anderson asked gently. The question caught Ethan off guard. He shook his head quickly, embarrassed. "Not yet. I'll get something after I sell a few more tickets." Without hesitation, Mr. Anderson gestured toward the small diner across the street. "Come with me. Lunch is on me." Ethan's eyes widened. He wanted to refuse, not out of pride, but out of fear. Fear of being a burden, fear of kindness that might be taken away. But the warmth in Mr. Anderson's gaze made it impossible to say no. They walked into the diner together, the cool air inside wrapping around Ethan like a blessing. Mersatu. Anderson ordered 2 plates of sandwiches and a tall glass of milk for Ethan. When the food arrived, the boy hesitated, staring at it as if it were a dream. "Go on," Mr. Anderson encouraged softly. Ethan took a bite, and then another, until the hunger inside him could no longer be restrained. He devoured the sandwich, drinking the milk so quickly that a white mustache formed on his upper lip. Mr. Anderson chuckled quietly, sliding a napkin across the table. "Slow down, son. The food isn't going anywhere." Ethan wiped his mouth, cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I'm sorry. It's been a while since I had something this good." Mr. Anderson's smile faded into a thoughtful expression. After a moment, he leaned forward. "Tell me something, Ethan. Do you go to school?" The boy lowered his gaze, fidgeting with the crust of bread on his plate. "No, sir. I never had the chance. My aunt says it costs money we don't have, so I sell tickets instead." Silence stretched between them for a moment. Mr. Anderson felt his heart tighten. He had dedicated his entire life to teaching, to opening doors for children. And here was a boy, with eyes full of intelligence, yet chained by circumstances beyond his control. "Do you want to go to school?" he asked finally. Ethan hesitated. Part of him wanted to say yes immediately. Another part whispered that it was foolish to dream of something impossible. But honesty won over fear. He nodded slowly. More than anything, Mr. Anderson studied him, the fire of determination flickering behind the boy's tired eyes. It reminded him of students he had once taught, children who just needed a chance to bloom. "Ethan," he said, his voice firm yet gentle, "if you truly want to study, I believe I can help." The boy's head snapped up, disbelief written all over his face. "Help? How?" "There are programs," Mr. Anderson explained. "Scholarships, charities. I know people who can make arrangements. But it will take hard work, and you'll need to promise me something." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. "What promise?" "That you won't give up," Mr. Anderson replied. "No matter how hard it gets, No matter how many times you feel like quitting, you'll keep going. You'll fight for your future. Tears stung Ethan's eyes, but he blinked them away quickly, afraid to look weak. He nodded, his voice trembling yet resolute. I promise. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt something he had nearly forgotten: hope. Sitting in that small diner across from a stranger who treated him with dignity, he felt as though the world had cracked open, just enough to let a sliver of light shine through. Mr. Anderson reached across the table and placed a steady hand on the boy's shoulder. Then, let's begin. At that moment, Ethan didn't realize it, but his life had just shifted onto a new path. The path would be long, difficult, and filled with challenges. But it was a path toward possibility, a path that could lead him far beyond the dusty streets where he had once stood, selling lottery tickets. The very next week, Ethan's life began to shift in ways he could never have imagined. Mr. Anderson kept his word. True to his background as a retired teacher, he didn't just offer vague encouragement, he took action. One morning, he arrived at the corner where Ethan usually sold his lottery tickets, carrying a brown leather satchel tucked under his arm. Come on, Ethan, he said, smiling. We're going somewhere today. Ethan hesitated. His aunt had told him not to trust people, not to get in the way of strangers, who might abandon him just like his father had. But something about Mr. Anderson felt different, safe, dependable. So he followed. They walked together through the streets until they reached a small building with peeling paint, but a welcoming sign, Hope Community Center. Inside, children were sitting at tables, learning, drawing, laughing. The air smelled of paper and chalk, a scent Ethan had always associated with worlds beyond his reach. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled at Mr. Anderson. Robert, it's been a while. Mr. Anderson introduced Ethan, explaining briefly about his situation. The woman's expression softened immediately. She leaned over the counter and spoke to Ethan directly. We have a scholarship program here, Ethan. It's meant for kids like you, bright minds, who just need a chance. If you're willing to work hard, we can enroll you. Ethan's heart raced. School, real school. He nodded so vigorously that his hair fell into his eyes. Yes, ma'am. I'll work harder than anyone. That afternoon, the paperwork was signed. For the first time in his life, Ethan was no longer just a boy. Selling tickets on the street, he was a student. The transition wasn't easy. On his first day, Ethan walked into the classroom, clutching a second-hand backpack Mr. Anderson had given him. His clothes were worn, his shoes too big, but his eyes gleamed with determination. The other children noticed him immediately. Some whispered, others giggled. One boy sneered, "That's the ticket kid. I've seen him on Main Street." Heat rose to Ethan's cheeks. He wanted to disappear, but he forced himself to keep walking until he found an empty desk at the back of the room. The teacher, Mrs. Garcia, welcomed him warmly. Class, this is Ethan Miller. He's joining us today. Let's make him feel at home. Though not all the students were kind, Ethan tried to ignore the laughter and whispers. He focused instead on the books, the blackboard, the magical world of learning that had finally opened its doors to him. Ethan quickly realized how far behind he was. He could barely read, struggled with simple arithmetic, and often felt like he was drowning in words and numbers that made no sense. At night, after finishing his chores at home, he sat by the dim light of a lamp Mr. Anderson had given him, practicing letters and sums until his eyes burned. There were nights he wanted to give up. He would slam the book shut, tears welling in his eyes. I can't do this, he whispered into the darkness. But then he remembered Mr. Anderson's words. Promise me you won't give up. So he opened the book again, slowly, tracing each word, each number, until it began to make sense. Mr. Anderson became more than just a benefactor. He became a mentor, even a father figure. Every afternoon after school, Ethan stopped by Mr. Anderson's small house. They would sit at the kitchen table, books spread out before them. Mr. Anderson was patient, guiding Ethan through spelling lists and math problems. "Don't be afraid of mistakes," he often said. "Mistakes mean you're trying." Sometimes he told stories of his years as a teacher of students who had gone on to become engineers, artists, even teachers themselves. Each story lit a spark inside Ethan, reminding him that he too could achieve something more. And when Ethan struggled, when the weight of poverty and ridicule threatened to crush him, Mr. Anderson would simply put a hand on his shoulder and say, "I believe in you." Those 4 words became Ethan's lifeline. It was during a science lesson one day that Ethan's dream truly took shape. The class was learning about the human body, and Mrs. Garcia explained how doctors use knowledge to heal the sick. Ethan listened with wide eyes, every word sinking deep into his heart. He remembered his mother lying weak in bed, whispering apologies for not being able to stay. He remembered the helplessness, the anger at not having money for treatment. That day, Ethan vowed silently, "I will become a doctor. I will save people like her." Months turned into years. Ethan's progress astonished his teachers. Once the boy who could barely read, he became one of the top students in his class. He devoured books, memorized lessons, and solved math problems with confidence. But it wasn't just intelligence, it was resilience. For every sneer or cruel joke from classmates, Ethan responded with quiet perseverance. For every obstacle, he doubled his effort. One evening, after Ethan proudly showed Mr. Anderson a test he had aced, the old man's eyes glistened with pride. "You're proving to the world what I saw in you that first day," he said softly. "You're meant for greatness, Ethan. Don't ever doubt that." Ethan didn't answer immediately. He just looked at the man who had given him everything: hope, guidance, and a future, and whispered, "Thank you. I won't let you down." That night, as Ethan lay in bed, clutching the test paper, he realized his life had transformed. He was no longer just surviving. He was moving forward, step by step, toward a destiny brighter than he had ever dared to dream. And it had all started with a stranger who saw him not as a boy selling lottery tickets, but as a child worth saving. The years that followed were marked by relentless struggle and remarkable triumph. For Ethan Miller, life became a constant balancing act between poverty and ambition, fear and determination, despair and hope. Yet with every step forward, the boy who once sold lottery tickets on the streets of El Paso grew stronger, wiser, and more resolute in his pursuit of becoming a doctor. By the time Ethan entered high school, his reputation as a hardworking student had spread among teachers and peers alike. No longer the timid boy who could barely read, he now stood tall with confidence. Still, the road was anything but smooth. His classmates came from families that could afford textbooks, new clothes, and extracurricular activities. Ethan, by contrast, often wore secondhand shirts and shoes, a size too large, given by charity or Mr. Anderson. He worked evenings and weekends at a local grocery store to cover expenses that the scholarship didn't. There were nights when exhaustion weighed so heavily that he fell asleep at his desk, textbooks still open beneath his head. But each morning, he forced himself to rise, remembering his promise to never give up. Some classmates admired him, others mocked him. "Charity case," one boy muttered as Ethan walked by. The words stung, but instead of responding with anger, Ethan poured his energy into academics. His grades soared. He joined the science club, winning small competitions with his quick mind and relentless preparation. Slowly, respect began to replace ridicule. Throughout these years, Mr. Anderson remained Ethan's quiet anchor. Every Friday evening, Ethan visited the old man's home. Together, they cooked simple meals, scrambled eggs, beans, or pasta, and talked about school life and dreams. Mr. Anderson's house smelled of old books and cedar wood, its shelves lined with memories of a life devoted to teaching. "Education is freedom, Ethan," Mr. Anderson often said as they sat with open books between them. It's the key that unlocks doors no one can close again. Sometimes they spoke of more personal things. Mr. Anderson confessed how much he missed his late wife, how the silence of the house weighed on him. Ethan listened, realizing that kindness went both ways. He could offer comfort as much as he received it. Though Ethan had no father, no mother, and no real home, he began to feel as though he belonged somewhere, right there in that little kitchen, with the man who had believed in him from the start. But life has a way of testing even the strongest spirits. During Ethan's junior year, his aunt, the woman who had never truly cared for him, yet remained his legal guardian, fell gravely ill. Years of alcohol abuse had destroyed her liver. One evening, Ethan came home to find her collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath. Panic surged through him as he called for an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors spoke in hushed tones. Her condition is critical, one said. She needs long-term care. The bills will be high. Ethan's world tilted. Though his aunt had neglected him, she was still the only blood relative he had left. He wanted to help, but the thought of medical expenses crushed him. For the first time in years, he considered dropping out of school to work full-time. That night, sitting on the steps of the hospital, Ethan buried his face in his hands. "Maybe I was foolish to dream," he whispered. "Maybe people like me aren't meant to go further." A familiar hand rested on his shoulder. Mr. Anderson had come, his eyes filled with quiet strength. "Ethan," he said firmly, "don't you dare give up now. You've come too far. But how can I pay for her treatment?" Ethan's voice cracked. "I barely make enough for books, let alone hospital bills." Mr. Anderson looked into his eyes. "We'll find a way. I'll help however I can. And your job is to stay in school. Do you hear me? You must keep going." Tears blurred Ethan's vision. "Why do you believe in me so much?" The old man's voice softened. "Because the first day I met you, I saw a boy with fire in his eyes. That fire was meant to light the way for others. You're not just surviving, Ethan. You're destined to heal, to inspire. Don't let this storm put out your flame." With Mr. Anderson's support, Ethan managed to stay in school. His aunt's health declined rapidly, and within months she passed away. It was a painful loss, but Ethan carried no bitterness. Instead, he vowed once more to dedicate his life to medicine, to help those who suffered as his mother and aunt had. Graduation day arrived like a sunrise after a long night. Ethan, wearing a borrowed cap and gown, walked across the stage to receive his diploma. The applause was thunderous, but his eyes sought only one face in the crowd. Mr. Anderson sat in the front row, tears glistening in his eyes, as he clapped harder than anyone else. When Ethan stepped off the stage, the old man pulled him into a hug. "I knew you could do it," he whispered. Soon after, Ethan applied to several universities, focusing on pre-med programs. He wrote essays late into the night, telling his story with raw honesty. The orphan boy, the street vendor, the mentor, who believed in him. His words carried the weight of resilience, and they resonated with admission committees. One summer afternoon, a thick envelope arrived. Ethan tore it open with trembling hands. He had been accepted into the University of Texas with a full scholarship. Not only that, but he was also awarded a living stipend, ensuring that financial hardship would no longer be a barrier. He ran to Mr. Anderson's house, waving the letter like a victory flag. The old man's eyes filled with pride as he read the words. "This is it, Ethan. The next chapter begins now." University life was a whirlwind. Ethan immersed himself in biology, chemistry, and anatomy. The workload was immense, the competition fierce. Many nights he studied until dawn, his desk covered in coffee cups and scribbled notes. Yet no matter how grueling it became, he never complained. Every challenge reminded him of why he was there to save lives. At times, doubt crept in. Surrounded by students from wealthy families, With tutors and resources, Ethan felt like an imposter. But then he remembered the promise he had made as a boy. I won't give up. He sought out professors, asked questions relentlessly, and joined study groups. Slowly, his determination won respect. He earned scholarships awards and recognition for his research projects. Whenever he visited home, he shared his achievements with Mr. Anderson, who listened with glowing pride. You're doing more than I ever dreamed, Ethan, he said one evening. You're carrying the torch further than I could. After years of unyielding effort, the day finally came when Ethan stood in front of a mirror, buttoning his first white coat. His reflection stared back at him, a young man with sharp features, eyes filled with purpose, and a heart stronger than ever. He thought of his mother, of the nights he went hungry, of the ridicule he had endured. He thought of his aunt, of loss of resilience. But most of all, he thought of Mr. Anderson, the man who had stopped to buy lottery tickets one hot afternoon, and in doing so, had changed the course of his life forever. On the day of his graduation from medical school, Ethan stood on the stage. As his name was called, Dr. Ethan Miller. The audience erupted in applause, but his gaze went straight to the old man in the front row, now frail, but still beaming with pride. As the applause echoed, Ethan knew this was only the beginning. He had achieved the dream, but his true mission lay ahead: to serve, to heal, to give back. Years passed in a blur of determination, struggle, and quiet victories. For Ethan Miller, life had transformed from dusty streets and lottery tickets into something he once thought belonged only in fairy tales. With Robert's steady guidance and the kindness of a few other teachers who saw his potential, Ethan had walked a path few children from his background could imagine. By the time he reached high school, Ethan was not only a good student, he was exceptional. He devoured books as if they were food for his soul, studied late into the night under a flickering lamp, and carried with him a relentless drive that amazed his teachers. What once had been a child's fragile dream to attend school had become the firm foundation of a greater ambition. Ethan wanted to be a doctor. The idea had taken root during the long evenings he spent helping Robert around the house. Robert, whose health had begun to falter with age, sometimes struggled with his heart. Ethan would watch closely, alarmed at every wince or cough. One night, after Robert recovered from a dizzy spell, Ethan asked, his voice quiet but full of conviction, "Mr. Anderson, what if I could become someone who helps people like you, a doctor maybe?" Robert had smiled faintly, his weathered hand resting on Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan, you have the heart for it, and a mind sharp enough to make it possible. Don't let the world tell you otherwise." From that moment on, Ethan's goal was set. But ambition didn't erase hardship. College loomed ahead like a mountain, and Ethan knew the climb would be steep. Applications required money, tuition seemed impossible, and the weight of his past still lingered. His aunt's house remained as chaotic as ever, and Ethan often found himself balancing school with part-time jobs to make ends meet. Still, he pressed forward. When he received his acceptance letter from the University of Texas, with partial scholarships and grants, Ethan cried for the first time in years. Not out of weakness, but because he realized he was stepping into a future his 10-year-old self could never have imagined. Robert was there when the letter arrived. The old man's eyes glistened as he hugged Ethan tightly. "You've done it, son. You're on your way." The years of medical school tested Ethan's endurance in ways nothing else had. Endless nights of study, grueling exams, hours spent in hospitals, shadowing doctors, and witnessing the fragility of life. It was exhausting, sometimes terrifying. There were days when he doubted himself, when fatigue and financial pressure pressed down on him so hard he thought he might collapse. But each time he remembered the boy on Main Street, clutching lottery tickets, hungry and unseen. He remembered the voice of his mother in his faintest memories, telling him he was special. And most of all, he remembered Robert's unwavering belief in him. One night, during his second year, Ethan sat in a quiet hospital corridor, his head in his hands. He had just lost his first patient. During a clinical rotation, a young woman whose illness was too advanced. The weight of helplessness nearly broke him. But as he sat there, he felt a familiar hand on his shoulder. It was Robert who had come to bring him dinner. "Ethan," he said gently, "being a doctor doesn't mean you can save everyone. It means you give everything you can, even when the odds are against you. That's what makes it noble." Those words became a compass for Ethan. Slowly, step by step, he advanced. He completed his residency, earned respect from his mentors, and carved a place for himself in the medical field. Each patient he treated reminded him of his journey, of how far he had come from those dusty streets. And through it all, Robert remained by his side. Though older and weaker now, he was Ethan's anchor, his family, his proof that kindness could alter the course of a life. When Ethan finally graduated, dressed in his white coat and cap, Robert sat in the front row of the auditorium. His hands trembled as he clapped, tears streaming freely down his face. Ethan walked across the stage, accepted his diploma, and searched the crowd until his eyes locked with Robert's. In that moment, he didn't just feel proud, he felt complete. Later that night, standing outside, under the Texas stars, Ethan turned to Robert. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." Robert smiled, his voice raspy but strong. "No, Ethan, you did it because you had the strength all along. I just helped you see it." But Ethan knew better. Robert hadn't just helped, he had saved him. He had lifted a boy from the shadows and set him on a path toward light. And Ethan made a silent promise. That night, as Robert grew older, as his health continued to decline, he would be there. Just as Robert had once cared for him, Ethan would now care for the man who had been his savior, his mentor, and in every way that mattered, his father. The boy who once sold lottery tickets to survive was now a doctor, ready to dedicate his life to helping others. But before the world could have him, there was one person he had to serve first, the man who had believed in him when no one else did. Time, as it always does, moved forward. The boy who once sold lottery tickets had become Dr. Ethan Miller, a respected physician in El Paso. Patients trusted his steady hands and compassionate heart, often remarking that he treated not just illnesses, but souls. Colleagues admired his work ethic, his humility, and his refusal to let success cloud his humanity. But while Ethan's life flourished, the years weighed heavily on Robert Anderson. The once sprightly retired schoolteacher had grown frailer. His silver hair thinned, his steps slowed, and his health began to falter more noticeably. Ethan, who had once depended on Robert for guidance and shelter, now found the roles reversed. It began with small things. Robert forgetting where he placed his reading glasses, struggling to carry groceries, losing his breath on short walks. Ethan, ever observant, noticed each sign. One evening, as Robert tried to stand from his chair and winced in pain, Ethan gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't push yourself, Mr. Anderson. Let me help you." Robert gave a weary smile. "Funny, isn't it? Feels like yesterday I was telling you to eat your vegetables and finish your homework. Now, you're telling me what to do." Ethan chuckled softly, though behind his smile was worry. "That's what family does. We take care of each other." And so, Ethan did. He arranged regular checkups for Robert personally, overseeing his care. He modified his home, adding railings and soft lighting to keep Robert safe. On days when Robert felt too weak to leave his bed, Ethan cooked meals, simple but hearty, just the way Robert liked them. He read aloud from the old novels Robert used to teach in school, his deep voice filling the quiet evenings. Sometimes Robert would protest. "You shouldn't waste your time fussing over an old man. You've got patience, a career." But Ethan would always interrupt, his tone firm yet tender. I wouldn't even be here without you. You're not a burden, Robert. You're my reason." The bond between them, once formed by chance on a dusty street, had grown unbreakable. Ethan didn't just see Robert as a mentor. Anymore, he saw him as the father he never had. One autumn afternoon, Robert fell ill with pneumonia. Ethan rushed him to the hospital, staying by his side every moment. He monitored his charts, spoke to the nurses, and held Robert's hand through every labored breath. It was an odd reversal of roles: doctor and patient caretaker, independent. But to Ethan, it felt like destiny. This was his chance to repay a debt he could never truly measure. Late one night, as the rain tapped against the hospital windows, Robert stirred awake to find Ethan dozing in the chair beside him. His voice was weak, but filled with emotion. "Ethan, why do you care so much? You could have walked away, lived your life, forgotten me." Ethan opened his eyes, leaning forward. His own voice broke as he answered, "Because you didn't forget me. You saw me when no one else did. You gave me a future. How could I ever turn my back on you?" Tears welled in Robert's eyes. "I only did what anyone should do." "No," Ethan whispered, gripping his hand. "You did what no one else did. And because of you, I'm who I am today." Robert squeezed his hand weakly, a proud smile flickering across his face. "Then I can leave this world knowing I did something right." Ethan shook his head, his grip tightening. "You're not leaving. Not yet. I'm not done taking care of you." The pneumonia passed, though it left Robert weaker. Ethan brought him home and devoted himself even more to his care. Each day was precious. They shared meals, memories, and laughter. Ethan would come home after long shifts at the hospital, exhausted, but always ready to sit by Robert's side, listening to stories of the classroom days, or simply enjoying the silence together. For Ethan, it wasn't duty, it was love. It was gratitude, woven into every gesture, every meal, every late-night conversation. He had once been a lost boy, invisible to the world. Now, he was a man who had found not only success, but a family, a father figure, and a purpose greater than himself. And Robert, in turn, found peace in knowing the boy he once lifted out of poverty had grown into a man of honor and compassion. In Ethan, he saw the legacy of kindness made flesh, a living reminder that even the smallest act of generosity could ripple into something extraordinary. On quiet nights, Robert would sometimes whisper, as Ethan tucked a blanket around him, "You've repaid me 100 times over, son." And Ethan, with tears in his eyes, but a steady smile, would always answer, "No, Robert, this isn't repayment. This is love." The seasons shifted once more. The Texas sun burned hot in summer leaves, blazed gold in autumn, and through it all, Ethan cherished every moment with Robert. But time, relentless as ever, continued its march. Robert grew weaker with each passing year. His hair turned white as snow. His hands trembled constantly, and his once sharp voice softened to a whisper. Ethan knew what was coming, though he refused to say it out loud. As a doctor, he understood the signs better than anyone. As a son, he prayed for more time. One crisp winter evening, Robert sat by the window, wrapped in a blanket. The glow of the fireplace lit his face as he looked out at the fading light. Ethan sat beside him, a cup of tea, warming his hands. "Ethan," Robert said quietly, "I've been thinking about that day I first met you. A skinny little boy on Main Street, holding lottery tickets like they were your lifeline. Do you remember?" Ethan smiled faintly. "I remember every detail. I was starving that day. I thought you were just another customer, but you became everything." Robert's eyes misted over. "You became everything too. I thought I was giving you a chance, but in truth, you gave me one. You gave me a reason to keep living after I'd lost so much." Ethan reached over, clasping Robert's frail hand in both of his. "You saved me, Robert, and I'll spend the rest of my life honoring that." Days later, Robert's health took a sharp decline. The end was near. Ethan stayed at his side constantly, not as Dr. Miller, but as the boy Robert had rescued years ago. He fed him spoonfuls of soup, read him poetry when words became too hard to find, and whispered prayers into the quiet nights. On Robert's final day, the house was filled with sunlight. He lay peacefully in his bed, Ethan beside him, holding his hand. Robert's breathing was shallow, but steady, his eyes half closed. With the last of his strength, he turned to Ethan. "I'm proud of you, son, more than words can say." Tears streamed down Ethan's face. "I love you, Robert, always." And, with a faint smile, Robert Anderson slipped away, leaving behind not emptiness, but a lifetime of love. The funeral was simple, just as Robert would have wanted. Former students, neighbors, and colleagues gathered to honor the man who had touched countless lives. Many spoke of Robert as a teacher who believed in them, who had encouraged them when no one else did. Ethan listened, his heart swelling with pride, realizing he wasn't the only life Robert had changed. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he stood at the front of the small chapel, his voice trembling but resolute. "Robert Anderson wasn't just a teacher," he said. "He was a father to me. He took in a boy who had nothing and gave him everything, a home, an education, a future. Because of him, I stand here today, not just as a doctor, but as a man who knows the power of kindness. His legacy lives in every patient I help, in every student who carries his lessons forward, and in my own heart forever." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Years later, Ethan would often return to the same street corner where he once sold lottery tickets. The town had changed new shops, fresh paint, cleaner sidewalks, but the memory of that boy in ragged clothes never left him. Sometimes he would see children standing on those same corners, selling candy or trinkets, their eyes filled with the same hunger and hope he once carried. Ethan never walked past them. He always stopped, always listened, always helped, because he knew better than anyone that one act of kindness could change a life. One spring afternoon, a young patient asked him during a checkup, "Dr. Miller, why did you want to become a doctor?" Ethan paused, his gaze drifting to the window where sunlight streamed in. He thought of Robert, of lottery tickets, and dusty streets of love and sacrifice. A bittersweet smile touched his lips. "Because once," Ethan said softly, "someone believed in me when no one else did, and I want to spend my life doing the same for others." The child didn't fully understand, but Ethan did. He always would. The story of Ethan Miller had come full circle, from a lost boy in shadows to a healer bathed in light, from the receiver of grace to the giver of it. And though Robert Anderson was gone, his spirit lived on in every heartbeat. Ethan saved every child he lifted, every life he touched. It was proof eternal that kindness once sown never truly dies. It grows, flourishes, and passes from one soul to the next, an unbroken chain of hope. And Ethan, with every step of his journey, carried Robert's love forward. Always. What started as a single act of faith from Robert had become a living architecture of kindness programs that trained hands and minds, policies that treated workers as people, and a culture that taught everyone to reach back and lift another. In the end, Emily realized the truth she'd felt since the first night Robert offered to help. The best way to honor a gift is to make sure it becomes everyone's to give.